Why was everyone laughing at her? The heat shimmered off the desert floor at Fort, turning the morning into a wavering blur. Rows of recruits gathered on the range, their rifles shining under the Nevada sun, optics gleaming like jewelry. Each weapon was polished, each scope factory fresh, all boasting the very best technology that contracts and catalogs could buy. Bragging rights were already echoing across the firing line, distances claimed, groupings boasted, numbers shouted like badges of honor. But wasn't laughing. She stepped quietly into the crowd, carrying the standard-issue rifle handed to her by supply. Nothing special, nothing that would draw attention. Yet at her side swung an old leather case, its strap cracked and fraying, the brass buckles dulled by time. It looked fragile among the steel and carbon, almost out of place. And that was enough. "What is that?" Tyler sneered, his voice sharp enough to slice across the morning air. He nudged Drake, who leaned in, smirking like a boy with a cruel secret. "Careful," Drake said loud enough for others to hear. "If you touch it, you might catch history dust." The laughter spread in ripples, quick, easy, thoughtless. Said nothing. She set the tripod into the dirt, her hands steady despite the sound of their jeers. The old scope groaned on its hinges as she adjusted it into place. Brass edges, tarnished green. The cracked leather cheek rest worn by decades of use. Every screw, every seam, seemed older than the recruits who mocked her. Rachel Harper tilted her head, her voice softer, almost sympathetic. "You should borrow a spare scope from supply. That thing can't even focus anymore." Even quieter and less cruel than the others, added, "Training's hard enough without dragging antiques." But didn't flinch. Her silence cut deeper than any reply. She let the scope stand, proud in its age, its presence a defiance she didn't need to voice. Sergeant's bark broke the laughter. "Pair up, shooters and spotters, rotate, increasing distances." His voice carried weight, drilling obedience into the dusty air. "Scores today decide who advances." The line shifted, rifles clinked, boots scuffed. His partner was Aaron. He was quiet, serious, with eyes that measured but didn't mock. He looked at her scope with hesitation, lips pressing tight as if wanting to say something, then deciding against it. He simply nodded, respect or at least restraint. They carried their gear to the 600-meter mark, where the steel target stood ghostly in the morning haze. Dropped prone, his body aligned with precision, his rifle gleaming under the sun. Crouched behind the old scope, her cheek pressed against the cracked leather rest, her eyes searching through glass dulled by time. And yet through it, the world revealed itself differently. "Wind from your right," she murmured. Her voice was calm, steady. 6, maybe 7 miles. Mirage shows lift near the target, hold a touch higher." Hesitated, doubt flickering across his brow. Then he trusted her. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. A sharp ring carried back from the steel plate dead center. Recruits turned, heads tilted. Their own high-tech devices were faltering against the shimmer, the mirage, the layered heat of the Nevada desert. Shots rang wide, scattered dust clouds to their misses. Fired again at 900 meters under soft instructions. Another center strike. His eyebrows lifted. "You saw that with this thing?" Only nodded. The whispers began, low at first, then spreading. Eyes darted toward her weathered scope. Digital readouts looked suddenly foolish beside brass and glass. Embarrassment prickled on the faces of those who had laughed. By the time the drill advanced to 1050 meters, took the rifle herself. Fed her numbers, but she trusted something deeper. She studied the ridge grass, the spirals of dust, the shimmer of the air as it twisted in silent currents. She ignored his last correction. One fraction of adjustment, one pause of breath. Her finger tightened. The bullet cracked across the valley. Silence stretched as long as the distance itself. Then the steel target sang, a perfect, undeniable bull's. The line went quiet. Drake spat a curse under his breath, muttered, "Lucky pull," but they knew, they all knew. A shadow fell across, Heavy boots stopped behind her. She looked up to see Captain Cole Davenport face, shoulders broad, eyes cold as flint. The man was known for his discipline, for words that rarely bent toward kindness. He said flatly, "Explain your method." Rose to attention, grounding the rifle at her side. "Observed the mirage and vegetation, sir. Predicted wind layers." "And you ignored your spotter's data." His voice carried no inflection, neither praise nor condemnation. "Yes, sir. The instruments showed the surface. The air above told a different story." Davenport crouched, lifting the battered scope from its tripod. He turned it in his hands, eyes narrowing. His thumb brushed grime away, revealing faint etchings in the brass. His breath caught, almost imperceptibly. There, nearly erased by time, were the words, 3125 Milla 1992. His hand trembled. For the first time in memory, the captain's mask cracked. He looked at, his eyes sharp, alive with something buried deep. "Where did you get this?" His voice was lower now. His heart pounded. "It was my grandfather, sir, Caleb Boon. He gave it to me when I was 12. Davenport's stare sharpened further, as if the name struck an old chord. He set the scope down with uncharacteristic reverence. "Report to my office at 1600. Bring the scope." He walked away, leaving frozen in the desert heat. The rest of the session blurred. Targets fell and rose, rifles cracked, but none of it touched her. All she could hear was the silence Captain Davenport left behind, and the unspoken weight in his reaction. That night in the dim barracks, she laid the scope on her blanket. The old brass caught the single overhead bulb, its edges glowing like memory itself. Her fingers traced its seams, searching. Something felt uneven. A click. A hidden compartment gave way. Inside was a folded slip of yellowed paper. She unfolded it with trembling hands. 3 lines of faded ink stared back at her. "Trust the wind. Trust yourself. CB." Her throat tightened. She sat still, the barracks quiet around her, yet her chest thundered with the sound of her pulse. It wasn't just an old scope, it was a vessel, a legacy, a secret message waiting decades for her hands. The ridicule of the day felt distant now. In its place stood something far heavier, far more personal. Outside, desert winds whispered through the open window, brushing the paper gently in her hands. She closed her eyes. The words echoed inside her chest, merging with the soft hush of the night air. Her grandfather's voice, carried by the wind. She had thought the scope was just a relic, but now she knew better. It wasn't just brass and glass. It was a key. And the lock it opened was only beginning to reveal itself. Why did Captain Davenport's hand tremble at the sight of her scope? The question haunted as the hours dragged toward 1600. Each tick of the clock inched slower, louder, as though the air itself conspired to stretch time. She sat on her bunk, boots polished, rifle cleaned, the battered scope resting across her lap. Its brass edges caught the barracks light like an old scar, ugly to some, sacred to her. No one spoke much to her after the range, even kept his distance. Maybe it was embarrassment, or maybe they sensed the shift, that the relic they mocked carried weight they hadn't yet understood. When the hour came, Rose with her gear. The halls of Fort were quiet, boots echoing against concrete floors. At the door to Davenport's office, her hand hesitated. A breath, a silent word to herself. Then she knocked. "Enter." The office smelled faintly of gun oil and worn leather. Dust motes drifted lazily in a shaft of light that cut through the blinds. Captain Davenport stood by the window, arms crossed, his face unreadable. But he was not alone. Behind the desk sat another figure, uniform pressed, hair silver gray, eyes sharp as glass. Colonel Martin. His presence radiated authority, the kind that pressed down like gravity. Davenport said, his voice was clipped but not cold, "Meet Colonel." Stepped inside, her back stiff, the scope cradled in her hands like fragile truth. She snapped to attention, heart hammering. Leaned forward, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Your grandfather," he said slowly, almost tasting the name. "Caleb Boon." The words hit harder than a gunshot. Blinked. "Yes, sir." His lips curved, but not in a smile, more like a memory surfacing from shadows. "We called him Harbor Light." The name struck like thunder. Froze. Harbor Light. She had heard whispers of that name, rumors passed in low voices at training camps, half dismissed as myth. A sniper who could read the wind like scripture. A marksman who made shots others swore were impossible, but always spoken of as legend, a ghost story, not flesh and blood. Her grandfather leaned back in his chair, voice steady, deliberate. "Your grandfather wasn't logistics, as the records claim. He was the finest extreme-range marksman this country ever saw. That engraving on the scope," he nodded toward the battered relic in her hands, "was no decoration. It marked a record shot, one we buried under classification." Davenport's jaw tightened. The military doesn't advertise ghosts. Boon's shot altered a mission's fate. That's all you need to know, at least for now. Gripped the scope. Her chest was a battlefield of emotions: pride, disbelief, fear. The silence stretched heavy before she found her voice. "Why tell me this?" Opened a folder stamped with red ink. He slid it across the desk. Inside, photographs, grainy black and white images of a facility hidden deep in the forest mountains. Concrete walls swallowed by trees, fences layered with wire, watchtowers without insignia. "This is High Pines," said. "Off-map, off-record, it houses project." The name settled like a stone in his gut. "Doesn't train ordinary shooters," Davenport added. "It cultivates those with unusual intuition, the kind Boon had, the kind you showed on the range today." His throat tightened. "You want me there?" His gaze was steady, unflinching. "You're not chosen because of bloodline. You're chosen because you see what others don't. Trains hunters who bend chaos into precision. We need that now more than ever." The weight of it pressed against her shoulders. The laughter of the recruits, the sting of being mocked, felt small compared to this. Her grandfather's legacy had been a myth. Now it was hers to step into or reject. She signed the papers without hesitation. By dawn was gone from Fort. The transport van rattled east, winding through nameless roads, carrying her deeper into the heart of nowhere. She sat with the scope secure on her lap, fingers curled around it like it might vanish if she let go. The landscape changed from desert scrub to rolling forest, green swallowing the horizon. Mountains rose, jagged teeth cutting into the sky. Hours passed. The van climbed higher into the Appalachians. Civilization slipped away until only wild trees and broken rock remained. Then at last the fences appeared, chain link topped with razor wire, gleaming even under gray skis. Guard towers overlooked the entrance. Soldiers stood in muted uniforms, rifles sleek and customized, unmarked by insignia. One guard scanned her badge. Another checked the scope. Neither spoke. Their silence was more intimidating than words. The van rolled through. Inside the compound, the buildings looked plain, concrete, square, industrial, but silence lingered in the air like a presence. No chatter, no laughter, only the quiet hum of something hidden, something cold. A figure waited at the steps, lean, wiry, built of sinew and grit, his eyes pale, sharp as glass. He radiated the kind of authority that didn't need shouting. "Master Sergeant Roy Talbot," he introduced himself, though not kindly. His voice carried gravel, each word deliberate. "I trained with Harbor Light. I bury excuses. You won't find sympathy here." Stood, though her pulse raced. Behind her, another transport pulled in. Doors opened. Drake climbed down, a cocky grin already plastered on his face. Followed, quiet, watchful. Price adjusted his cap, steady and broad-shouldered. Aaron carried a case of instruments, his expression calm as stone. Talbot's eyes swept across them like a blade. "5 of you, different skills, same test. Don't mistake invitation for acceptance. Legacy doesn't pay tuition. His gaze pinned, not even Boon's. The recruits exchanged glances. No jokes now. Tension hung sharp, cutting into silence. The compound swallowed them. Gray halls, sealed doors, bunks small and solitary. Silence was the only welcome. The next morning there was no siren, no bugle, only Talbot kicking doors open before dawn, dragging them into the valley with orders barked like thunder. Fog clung to the mountains. Targets loomed in the haze. Steel plates spread from 650 meters out to 1,550. The air was damp, heavy, merciless. Diagnostic day, Talbot announced. 3 shots per distance. No excuses. We measure skill, not talk. One by one, they stepped up. First, confident, shoulders loose. 3 hits at 650, 2 at 900, but his shots scattered wide at 1,200. Drake followed, swagger in every step. His groupings were tight until 1,300. At 1,500, he missed clean. Took longer, patient. Her pace slow, deliberate. 2 solid hits at 1,400. 1 edge graze at 1,550. Price steadied himself. His spread passable, but nothing more. Didn't shoot. His role was data, feeding numbers, corrections. His focus sharp, his silence sharper. Then stepped forward. She dropped prone at 650, adjusted quietly, breath deep, 3 shots, 3 perfect rings. At 900, she read the grass, not the instruments. At 1,100, she trusted the shimmer, not the numbers. Her bullets landed where others faltered. At 1,300, her third round struck dead center. Then came 1,550. The scope swayed with shifting winds. Thermals danced across the valley, chaotic and cruel. Her first shot scraped the edge of the plate. The second veered wide. The third off target completely. Drake smirked, his laugh sharp. Guessed the legacy fizzled, chuckled, though less certain than before. Talbot said nothing. He scribbled on his clipboard, face unreadable. Secure rifles, debrief at 1900. His tone revealed nothing, no praise, no anger. That night couldn't sleep. She walked alone under the cold moon, the compound silent around her. Her steps carried her to the edge of the woods, where a small memorial garden lay hidden. Rows of unmarked stones caught the silver glow. Talbot was already there, sitting on a bench, gaze fixed on the stones. He came here too, Talbot said softly without looking at her. His voice was rough but not cruel now. Boon, first week he missed the long shots, thought he'd failed. His breath caught, he missed. Talbot's eyes narrowed, reflecting moonlight. Once, that miss drove him to create the hush method, a way to steal the mind when chaos screams. You'll hear more when you're ready. He rose, leaving her alone with the whisper of the wind through the trees. Back in her quarters, set the old scope on her desk. Her fingers traced its seams, searching, restless. A faint click answered. A hidden compartment slid open. Inside, a strip of faded silk marked with tiny coded symbols. Beneath it, wrapped in oil cloth, a notebook. She unfolded the first page, her breath trembling, handwriting sharp, precise. The title scrawled across the top, The Hush Method, Field Notes. Diagrams, winds layered like rivers, thermal spirals mapped like tides. Notes etched in margins, don't silence doubt, place it aside. Hear the hush, not the noise. Stared until her eyes burned. The scope hadn't just carried a message, it carried an entire doctrine. Her grandfather's voice, hidden in brass and silk, waiting for her to be ready. She closed the notebook with trembling hands. Tonight she hadn't found failure. She had found Harbor Light's voice. And Project, cold and merciless, had just begun to reveal its true weight. Why did the silence feel heavier than the gunfire? The mountains of high pines loomed black against the sky, jagged edges cutting into the stars. At 4:30, woke without an alarm. Something in her chest stirred her awake before the cold could creep into her bones. She dressed quickly, boots tight, scope slung over her shoulder. The barracks were quiet, too quiet. Master Sergeant Talbot was already waiting on the range, his breath smoking in the bitter air. No lanterns burned, no voices called, just silence heavy as stone. He held something in his hand, a strip of faded silk, edges fraying, symbols inked across it in careful, coded strokes. He placed it into his hands without ceremony. Not a toy, not decoration. Boon drew this himself. Map the valley, don't fire a round, read the air, write it here. Dropped prone, her cheek pressed to the cracked leather of her grandfather's scope. Through its battered glass, the world revealed itself in ways others couldn't see. The air shimmered like rivers, curling and bending, invisible yet undeniable. Her hands shook as she traced the lines on the silk, swirls near the ridge, a push along the treetops, an updraft spiraling from the canyon floor. Each distortion marked carefully, trembling strokes that tried to capture chaos. Hours passed. Her body ached, her breath fogged in the cold, but she didn't stop. At last Talbot studied the cloth. His jaw flexed, his expression gave nothing. Then, with the faintest nod, he said, closer than most on their first week, "Keep at it." Approval, small, sharp, but real. By nightfall, the recruits expected rest. Instead, Talbot's voice dragged them from their bunks and into the forest. No lanterns, no electronics, only rifles and shadows. They stumbled through thick underbrush, branches clawing, mud sucking at boots. Finally, Talbot halted them in a clearing. The forest was silent but for the wind whispering through pine needles. "Tonight," Talbot said, voice low, rough as gravel, "the hush decides who stays." The recruits glanced at each other. No one spoke. A few faint heat targets glowed in the dark, invisible to the naked eye. No numbers, no gadgets, just you and the hush. Talbot's pale eyes swept across them like blades. "Noise will lie, find stillness. Fire only when you know." Drake cursed under his breath as he set up. His electronics flickered, struggling in the black. He squeezed off a shot wide. His scope couldn't pierce the dark. His temper cracked louder than his rifle. Steadied herself, patient, careful. She fired. Missed the shot, echoed uselessly into the trees. Whispered calculations, but without instruments, the numbers collapsed into meaninglessness. Then lay flat on the cold earth, cheek against dirt, eyes closed for a heartbeat, listening. A stream gurgled faintly to the north. Leaves whispered east to west. Crickets chirped, then stilled when the wind shifted. She inhaled deep, steady. She opened her eyes. The hush was there, waiting. The trigger broke. The round vanished into blackness. For a moment there was nothing. Then metal rang, the first hit of the night. Talbot's head turned, eyes narrowing. He didn't smile, but the silence around him was different. Again listened, felt the air brush her skin. The second round cracked, striking true. The third followed, 3 targets down, 3 echoes singing back in the night. The clearing went still, even the wind seemed to pause. Drake stared, disbelief burning behind his scowl. "Luck," he spat, "blind chance." Talbot cut him off, voice sharp. "Luck doesn't draw maps in the dark, saw what you didn't, shape up or ship out." The warning cut deeper than any insult. Drake's grin faltered, his arrogance cracked. For the first time, doubt crossed his face. The exercise ended with exhaustion, but his veins hummed with something more than fatigue. She had stepped into the hush, into the silence that her grandfather once trusted, and it had answered her. By morning, rumors spread that Drake would be dismissed. His arrogance too heavy, his failures too loud. He sat alone in the mess hall, rage smoldering behind clenched fists. Walked past him, tray in hand. She hesitated, then turned back. "Don't quit," she said softly. "We need every rifle here. Harbor Light never walked alone." Her words were quiet, but they struck deeper than she realized. Drake's eyes lifted, baffled. For a moment the fire dimmed. He gave a small nod. That moment saved him, and it marked as something more than just another trainee. 2 days later, Talbot gathered them on the long-range platform. The air was sharp, the valley below alive with shifting winds. "Head-to-head trial," he barked. 1,800 meters, 3 rounds each, prove who you are. Drake went first. His hand steadied on the rifle, pride clinging to him like armor. First shot, edge hit. Second, center. Third, wild, torn by sudden gusts. He cursed under his breath. Then stepped forward. She laid the silk cloth beside her, tracing the symbols her grandfather had drawn. She closed her eyes until doubt drained away. She listened for the hush. The first round cracked, sailing true dead center. The second followed, striking clean. The third broke the silence like glass, another perfect hit. The range stilled. Even Drake froze, disbelief etched into his face. Talbot's voice carried across the wind. "That's the hush point," she found it. For the first time, understood. It wasn't about erasing noise. It was about stepping into a space where noise had no power. That night the barracks were quiet. No jokes, no laughter, only silence, different this time. They had seen something shift. Wasn't chasing her grandfather's ghost anymore. She was carving her own path. But never paused. Colonel summoned Talbot the next morning. Behind closed doors, their voices carried the weight of decisions too heavy for recruits to imagine. Orders had arrived. An early mission. Most trained for months before deployment, but not now. The council's choice was final. "She goes," said. "We need to know if Harbor Light's legacy is real or myth." Talbot returned to the range, his face unreadable. He gathered the 5 recruits, his voice clipped, harder than ever. "Command wants one of you in the field. It won't wait." Eyes turned toward, Drake's mouth opened then shut. Eyes narrowed, looked down. Talbot's gaze locked on. "Pack your gear, tomorrow you deploy." The words struck like thunder. Training was over, project was done with theory. Armed with her grandfather's scope and the hush method, was about to face her first real mission. Why would command send her now, so soon, so untested? The briefing room was silent, thick with anticipation. Colonel stood at the head of the table, the weight of his stare pressing on every soul present. Talbot loomed beside him, arms folded, a statue carved from stone. On the table, a single satellite photograph glared up in black and white. A fortress-like compound buried deep in jagged Afghan mountains. His voice cut the silence. "Target, architect of 3 embassy bombings. He hides behind stone and shadows, planning more. Too many hostages inside for a drone strike. The only window, dawn prayer in the courtyard, for less than 4 minutes." He looked at, and his words landed like iron. "The shot is yours." Her throat tightened. "Range." Steady but pale, answered. 3,728 meters. The number hung in the air, heavy, unreal. Drake exhaled sharply, shaking his head, shifted uneasily. Even Talbot's jaw clenched for the briefest second. Leaned forward. "This is why exists. The impossible, the quiet between storms. We don't need ordinary." His eyes locked on. "We need you." The world seemed to shrink around her. Her pulse drummed in her ears. She thought of her grandfather, of the words he had hidden inside the scope. "Trust the wind. Trust yourself." She nodded once, firm, steady. Night cloaked the mountains when the MH-47 thundered low across the valleys. No lights, no sound but the deep, rattling thrum of rotors. Inside, the team sat strapped tight, faces hidden behind shadows and helmets. Drake chewed the inside of his cheek, restless, held her weapon with knuckles white, double-checked instruments though his hand trembled. Sat silent, the battered scope across her lap, her fingers brushing the brass as though it could steady her heartbeat. The helicopter flared, dropped, boots hit dirt. The bird vanished back into the black, swallowed by night. Silence returned, vast and crushing. The climb began. Jagged slopes tore at their gloves, loose rocks slipping under boots. The air thinned with every step, lungs burning as the mountain swallowed them whole. At last, Talbot's hand shot up, "Halt." They dug in with knives and hands, carving a shallow hide into the mountainside. Their breaths misted in the cold. A faint buzz grew above, the whining hum of a thermal drone. "Patrol." Every chest froze mid-breath. Not a twitch, not a sound. The drone passed overhead, blind to the figures pressed against stone. Only when the sound faded did shoulders ease, hearts still hammering in silence. Talbot signaled, "Continue." By first light the compound appeared below, gray stone walls, ringed with guards packing in predictable arcs. The courtyard lay empty, shadows stretching long under the rising sun. Said her grandfather's scope, whispered data into her ear, voice thin but sharp. Wind, 8.1 west, thermal lift at valley floor, adjust 8 mils left. Drake muttered corrections, scanning with his sleek optics. Drop by half, mirage tightening at 800. His rifle swept the ridges, guarding their flanks. Silence pressed harder than the mountain air. Target expected in 3 minutes, whispered. His fingers shook against his tablet. The door opened. A man stepped into the courtyard. Broad shoulders, dark beard streaked with gray, robes sweeping as he walked. Exhaled, centered him in her crosshairs. Her breathing slowed. The world shrank to a circle of glass and the rhythm of her pulse. Then movement. A child. A boy darted into the courtyard, chasing a stray ball. He froze inches from eyes wide, time fractured. His fingers stiffened on the trigger, her lungs locked. "Now," Drake hissed. "Not yet," whispered. The boy lingered, kicking the ball once, then running off. The door shut behind him. The courtyard cleared. Another minute, another eternity. The door opened again, returned unrolling a prayer mat, facing east, alone. Murmured numbers. Wind steady, mirage compressing, correction 8.4 west. Drake overlaid, drop another half. Listen, but the noise blurred. She slid the silk strip beside her, tracing the symbols with her fingertip. The wind's map revealed itself, whispered through shifting leaves and the hush of air. Her grandfather's voice echoed inside her, "Trust the quiet, not the noise." She inhaled. Her finger took the trigger's slack. 3.9 seconds stretched to forever. The rifle cracked. The bullet began its impossible journey, arcing across valleys, through layers of wind, past spirals of heat and light. Time slowed. All eyes locked on the vapor trail that shimmered like a ghost across the sky. The target knelt in devotion, unaware. Impact. Jerked once, collapsed. No cry, no alarm. Silence swallowed the courtyard. "Target down," whispered, his voice barely a breath. Drake lifted binoculars, disbelief plain across his face. Impossible. Then headlights slashed across the hillside. A patrol truck. Its beam swept inches from their hide. Hearts pounded louder than the engine. The light crawled on, passed, vanished into the distance. Talbot's voice cut like stone. "Pack up. Extraction in 12. They moved with hands sharper than drills, erasing prints, carrying silence like a weapon. At the ridge the helicopter returned, rotors shaking the dawn. They climbed aboard, swallowed by the thrum of escape. Back at High Pines, Colonel was waiting. His eyes scanned their faces but settled only on. "You did it," he said. His voice carried awe beneath its steel. "History without witness." From a drawer he pulled a small wooden box. Inside a silver medallion glimmered, a flame encircled by mountain peaks. "Project's highest token," said. "Only 12 have ever received it. Your grandfather was first. You are 12th." The room hushed. Even Drake lowered his eyes. Talbot gave the slightest nod, approval hard-earned. His voice was low, deliberate. "We want you as operator and instructor. Teach the hush method, carry it forward." Closed the box, her hand firm. I'll do both. The field proves the classroom. Why did silence suddenly feel heavier in the classroom than on the battlefield? 6 months had passed since the mountains. 6 months since the impossible shot that carried her name into a legacy she never asked for. Walked across the firing range at high pines with boots crunching against gravel, the battered scope swinging from its strap. The brass glimmered in the morning light, but proud, as though it bore its own history with every scrape. Before her stood 7 new recruits, young, sharp-eyed, hungry. Their rifles gleamed, optics polished, uniforms crisp. They looked at her with a mix of awe and doubt. They knew the story, everyone knew it now. The woman who made the impossible shot, the granddaughter of Harbor Light. But stories were fragile things, legends even more so. One recruit, a young lieutenant with a smirk carved into his face, couldn't help himself. He glanced at the scope resting on her mat and scoffed. "Captain," he said, his voice tinged with half respect, half arrogance, "that thing belongs in a museum." The group chuckled softly, testing boundaries, waiting to see how she would respond. Didn't flinch, she slid the scope toward him. "Go ahead," she said quietly, "compare it." The lieutenant raised an eyebrow, but curiosity won over pride. He peered through the battered brass tube, expecting blur and dust. Instead, his smirk faded. His breath caught as clarity cut through the morning haze sharper than expected. The silence that followed spoke louder than any reply could have given. She said nothing more. She didn't need to. The recruits shifted, uneasy now. Respect had crept in, carried not by words but by quiet demonstration. "Lesson 1, finally said, her voice steady, carrying across the line. "Silence isn't weakness, it's control. Out there, noise will lie to you. Doubt will scream at you. If you can't hear the hush beneath it, you'll fail." She lifted the silk strip, the one her grandfather had hidden inside the scope. Its edges frayed, symbols still sharp, drawn in his careful hand. She pinned it against the mat, letting the recruits lean in to study it. "This is not magic," she said. "It's not even technology, it's discipline, a way of seeing, a map drawn by someone who trusted the wind more than the numbers." The recruits nodded, some eager, some doubtful, but they listened. Training began. The valley below high pines stretched wide and merciless. Fog curled along its edges, wind spiraled invisible across its spine. The recruits took their positions, rifles braced, optics scanning. Paced behind them, eyes sharp, words measured. "Read the air," she instructed. "Not the numbers, don't fight the wind, follow it." One recruit fired too quickly, his bullet scattering wide into the dirt. Stopped behind him, her voice calm but cutting. "You pulled before you listened. You'll miss every time you let fear rush you." Another hesitated too long, caught between calculations and instinct. His rifle never fired, crouched beside him. Doubt won't vanish. It will always whisper. The point is not to silence it. The point is to set it aside. She demonstrated once. Dropped prone, cheek to the battered scope, breathing slow. She let the hush settle, the world quieting around her heartbeat. One trigger squeeze. Steel rang across the valley. The recruits fell silent. They weren't watching her anymore. They were watching the hush itself, something they couldn't explain but felt press into the air. By nightfall, their groupings had tightened. Not perfect, not even close, but different, more patient, more disciplined. Still, doubt lingered. That night sat alone in her quarters. The medallion had given her resting in its wooden box on the desk. She opened it, stared at the silver flame encircled by peaks. Her grandfather's medallion had been the first. Now hers lay beside it, the 12th. The weight of it pressed on her chest. Was she worthy of carrying this forward? Of teaching others a method born in silence, forged by failure and persistence? She remembered the night Talbot told her that her grandfather missed once, that it was the miss that made him. She had missed too. At 1,550 she had failed, but failure had become the doorway. Maybe that was the point. She closed the box, setting it aside. The next morning, Talbot waited at the range, his arms crossed, eyes watching from a distance. He rarely praised, rarely even spoke unless necessary, but his presence was its own measure. The recruits lined up again. This time, handed the silk strip to the young lieutenant who had mocked her scope the day before. His hands hesitated, almost reverent now. "Map the valley," she told him. "No shots, just listen." Hours passed. The recruits traced invisible rivers of air onto the cloth, their frustration growing as the wind shifted faster than their pens could follow. Some cursed, some threw their hands down in defeat. But the lieutenant didn't. He kept working, stubborn, his strokes messy but determined. Knelt beside him when the exercise ended. She studied his markings, wrong in places, scattered in others, but honest. She gave a single nod. "Closer than I was my first time." His face shifted, surprise then pride, tempered by respect. The others looked on, understanding. Legacy wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence. That evening walked the perimeter alone, the scope slung over her shoulder. The forest whispered. The hush followed. She thought of her grandfather, how he had hidden pieces of himself inside this battered scope, trusting that one day someone would find them. She thought of the boy in the courtyard, the child who had stopped her finger on the trigger, how close she had come to erasing more than a target. The hush wasn't just about wind and distance. It was about restraint, patience, choice. And teaching that might be harder than making the shot itself. The recruits were watching her now, not for her grandfather's shadow, but for her own path. And the silence she carried was no longer only hers. It was theirs to learn, theirs to bear, theirs to carry forward if they could. Why do some lessons break people before they build them? The morning sky over high pines was gray and restless. Winds swept through the valley in erratic bursts, bending the trees, rattling the range markers. It was the kind of day that exposed weakness, the kind of day that turned cocky shooters into trembling hands. Stood at the line with her recruits, her voice steady, calm. "Today isn't about distance, it's about chaos. The wind doesn't care about your pride, it doesn't care about your technology. Listen to it or fail." The recruits dropped prone. Steel plates shimmered in the haze across the valley. First shot wide, second low. The third missed entirely. The young lieutenant who had once mocked her scope cursed under his breath. His calculations tumbled apart as quickly as his patience. Another recruit gritted his teeth after each shot, jaw clenched until it seemed ready to crack. His frustration spilled louder with every miss. "It's impossible," he shouted, slamming his hand into the dirt. The others faltered too, groupings scattered, confidence unraveling. Watched silent, she knew this moment, she had lived it, she had missed before. And she remembered what her grandfather's notes said: "Don't silence doubt, place it aside." But the recruits didn't know how, not yet. "Up," she ordered. Her voice cut sharp across the line. They hesitated, but the weight in her tone left no room for disobedience. They rose, rifles still in hand. She walked down the line, eyes steady, pace deliberate. "You think silence means nothing. That missing means failure. But silence isn't absence, it's space. And failure isn't the end, it's the doorway." Her words met blank stares, clenched jaws. Snapped, "Doorway to what? Humiliation." His voice cracked under the weight of his anger. "I'm not him, I can't do this." He ripped his helmet off, chest heaving, eyes burning with shame. The others looked away, some uncomfortable, some sympathetic. Stepped closer, quietly, deliberately. "You think I never missed?" Her tone was calm, but her words struck like a hammer. "I failed at 1,550. I failed when my grandfather's method was staring me in the face. I failed until I learned that silence doesn't erase the noise. It puts it in its place." His breathing slowed, though his fists still trembled. She crouched, picking up a handful of dust. She let it sift through her fingers, carried away by the breeze. The wind never stops moving. You can't control it. You can only ride with it. That's the hush. Not silence, not magic, just listening long enough to see. She let the dust scatter. The recruits followed the motion, their eyes fixed on the grains dissolving into the air. His jaw loosened. He sank to one knee, then the other, staring at the ground as though seeing it differently. He didn't speak, but the rage had drained from him. The others watched, something shifting in their expressions. "Reset your scopes," said, her voice softened but carried weight. "You've got 5 more rounds. Breathe, listen, don't fight." They dropped prone again. The valley seemed less hostile now, though the winds hadn't changed. One by one, the shots began to land closer. Not all hits far from it, but closer. Some rang steel, others grazed, none were wasted. Fired last. His shot cracked, disappeared into the distance. For a moment, silence. Then the faint clang of steel drifted back across the valley. His head jerked up, eyes wide. He didn't cheer, didn't grin, just breathed long and steady, as if the hush had finally brushed against him. By nightfall, the recruits were exhausted but different. Their laughter at dinner was quieter now, not sharp, not mocking. It was tired, respectful, edged with a new kind of understanding. Sat apart, her tray untouched, her mind circling. Had she really taught them anything? Or had the wind itself done the work? Her hand drifted to the scope lying beside her, brass worn smooth under her fingertips. She remembered the slip of paper her grandfather had hidden within it. Trust the wind, trust yourself. She had trusted, but teaching others to do the same, that was another battlefield entirely. Later that night, she walked alone to the memorial garden. The stones glowed pale under moonlight, silent witnesses to lives swallowed by. She sat on the bench Talbot once occupied, staring at the rows of markers. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Am I enough?" The wind stirred through the trees, soft, constant, unanswering. Or maybe it was answering in the only way it knew how, by reminding her that silence was not absence. Talbot's voice broke the stillness. He had approached without sound, as he always did. "Teaching isn't about being enough," he said, sitting beside her. "It's about giving enough. Harbor Light never thought he was ready either, but he gave anyway. That's the only reason we still speak his name." Swallowed, her throat tight. "And if I fail them?" "Then they'll fail forward," Talbot said, his pale eyes locked on hers. "Just like you did, just like Boon did. Failure's part of the method, part of the hush." He rose, leaving her with the night, the stones, and the whisper of the wind. Back in her quarters, opened her grandfather's notebook again. She traced the notes, the diagrams, the scribbles in the margins. She lingered on one line underlined twice. "Silence doesn't erase fear, it carries it." She closed the book. Her recruits would fail again. They would break again. And she would carry them through it, not with perfection, but with persistence. And maybe that was enough. Why did the forest suddenly feel too quiet? Dawn bled slowly across high pines, the ridges painted in ash and silver. The recruits stood ready at the edge of the range, their rifles slung, nerves humming. They had grown in 6 weeks, groupings, steadier hands, quieter mouths. But today was different. Could see it in their faces, the kind of fear you can't fake. Talbot addressed them first, his gravel voice grinding into the cold. "This isn't the classroom, this is your crucible. You'll move as a team, track, identify, and eliminate targets. Some will be steel, some live opposition. Fail here and closes its doors to you. Fail badly enough." His pale eyes cut sharp. "And it may close them forever." The recruits glanced at each other, unease curling through the group. Stepped forward, her voice softer, steadier. "The hush doesn't vanish when bullets fly, it only grows harder to hear. You want to survive today? Listen. Don't rush. Don't chase noise." His jaw set. The young lieutenant tightened his grip on his rifle, checked his spotting gear twice, his calm mask cracking at the edges. They moved out. The forest swallowed them whole, tall pines stretching like cathedral pillars, the air damp with moss and earth. Birds scattered as boots pressed into soil. Silence pressed close, broken only by breath and the faint shift of branches overhead. The first steel target appeared across a narrow clearing, half hidden by fog, signaled, dropped prone, fired, and struck clean. The team exhaled, their tension loosening for a heartbeat. Then came the first ambush. Blanks snapped through the trees, cracking close enough to make hearts lurch. Opposition force, real soldiers playing enemy, moving with lethal intent. The recruits dove for cover, chaos ripping through formation. "Contact left," Drake shouted, voice too loud, too rushed. His shot missed wide. Returned fire frantic, rounds chewing bark but striking nothing. The enemy's blanks rained closer, the sound of combat echoing in the forest like thunder. "Find the hush," barked, her voice sharp, cutting through panic. She pressed flat against a fallen log, raising her scope. The shimmer of leaves, the sway of branches there. She fired. A blank cracked back in response, the enemy soldier raising his hand in signal hit. The recruits steadied one by one. Corrections sharpened, quieter, struck another target clean. Drake clenched his teeth, his second shot finding its mark. Breath deep, slow, and finally, his bullet sang true. Silence returned, broken only by ragged breaths. But it didn't last. As the team advanced deeper, the valley turned cruel. Crosswinds screamed between ridges. Shadows twisted across the forest floor. Another ambush hit harder, closer, soldiers hidden in the rocks above, their fire raining down. Ducked, his tablet nearly struck from his hands. The recruits scattered, panic rising again. Then a scream. One of the younger recruits stumbled, tripping on roots, his ankle snapping hard against stone. Pain tore through him, his cry carrying louder than any rifle crack. The opposition force didn't stop. They closed in, pressing their advantage, their blanks hailing down like thunder. His pulse hammered. This wasn't supposed to go this far. A training exercise, yes. Pain, yes, but not this, not like this. "Cover him," she shouted, her voice breaking with urgency. She dropped beside the injured recruit, dragging him into partial cover. Blanks whined overhead, too close, too real. For the first time, her recruits weren't looking at her as an instructor. They were looking at her as their only anchor. Drake's face twisted, panic threatening to drown him. Locked eyes with him. "You fire or he doesn't make it out." His jaw clenched, his rifle cracked, steel rang, one enemy down. Picked up the rhythm, her calm steadier than the others. 2 shots, 2 hits. Froze for a heartbeat, doubt clawing back. His voice cut sharp, burning through the noise. Set it aside. He inhaled, exhaled, fired, the target folded. Silence swept across the forest again. The opposition force fell back, signaling the end of the engagement. The recruits slumped against trees, panting, sweat dripping despite the cold. The injured one grit his teeth, pain carved into his face. Tightened a makeshift bandage around his ankle, her hands steady even as her own pulse raged. Talbot emerged from the shadows. He had watched the entire engagement in silence, his arms crossed. His gaze swept the recruits, then settled on. "Not clean," he said. His voice was low, heavy, but alive. The recruits straightened, their pride wounded but their eyes sharper now. Met Talbot's stare. She expected judgment, maybe disappointment. Instead, he gave a single nod, barely perceptible, but enough. That night the recruits sat together in the mess hall, quieter than usual. No jokes, no bravado, just silence, the kind earned through fear and fire. Ate little, her thoughts heavy. She replayed every scream, every shot, every breath of panic. She thought of the boy in the courtyard months ago, her finger frozen on the trigger. She thought of nearly breaking, of Drake's near collapse. Was she leading them forward, or dragging them into chaos they weren't ready for? Later she walked again to the memorial stones. The hush followed her, whispering through the trees. She stood among the unmarked markers, her voice a quiet confession. "They almost broke today. I almost broke with them." The wind moved through the pines, carrying no answers, only stillness. But somewhere in that stillness she felt it, the same presence that lived inside the battered scope, the same persistence her grandfather had left her. Not comfort, not reassurance, just a reminder: silence doesn't promise safety, only clarity. And clarity was enough. Tomorrow the recruits would rise again, and so would she. Why did endings never feel final, only heavier? Weeks after the forest crucible, high pines shifted again. The recruits had hardened. Their shots were cleaner, their maps, their breath steadier. Yet beneath the discipline lived something raw, fear unspoken, doubt unshared. And command knew it. Received the orders one dawn in its office. The folder was slim, stamped with the same red ink she remembered from months before. But this wasn't a mission for her alone. It was for her and the recruits she now carried on her shoulders. Final assessment, said, his voice was iron. A live operation, off record, your team will handle it. No safety nets, no shadows to catch you if you fall. Talbot stood in the corner, arms crossed, his pale eyes locked on. They're yours now, lead them. His throat tightened, but she nodded. She had no choice. No instructor ever did. The briefing was short. A small convoy carrying weapons-grade material would move through a mountain pass at night, lightly guarded but unpredictable. No drones, no artillery, no reinforcements. The recruits had to intercept, disable, and extract evidence. If they failed, would close its doors to them forever. The recruits sat in silence as laid the map across the table. Their eyes flickered between determination and dread. We do this as one, told them. Her voice was low but firm. We trust the hush. We trust each other, nothing else matters. Night swallowed them as they moved out. The forest floor was slick, the air sharp with cold. Their breaths misted as they climbed, the convoy's route etched only in shadows and memory. The rumble came first, distant engines echoing through the pass. Headlights cut faint beams across The recruits froze, signaled. They dropped prone along the slope, rifles raised. Whispered data, his voice trembling but precise. Wind steady, 5.3 west. Cross drift at valley floor, adjust right. Drake muttered, his arrogance replaced now with control. Target lead vehicle, disable without ignition. Steadied her rifle, eyes calm as ice. Clenched his jaw but held his breath steady, waiting. The convoy approached, slow, unaware. Now whispered. 3 rifles cracked in near unison. The first truck's tire shredded, rubber exploding into sparks. The vehicle lurched sideways, grinding against the rock wall. Chaos rippled through the convoy as brakes screeched, shouts erupting. The recruits fired again, controlled this time. Another tire gone. A guard dropped to the dirt, raising his hands in surrender. But then returned fire. Blanks were expected, live rounds were not. The hillside erupted with muzzle flashes from hidden flanks. The recruits scrambled, dirt spraying as bullets tore through the earth around them. Contact right, Drake shouted, his voice tight with fear but steady enough. His pulse hammered. This wasn't a drill anymore. Something had gone wrong. The opposition wasn't simulation. They were real, armed, dangerous. Hold, barked. She dropped to her scope, breath burning cold in her chest. The air shimmered, gusts ripping down the pass. Noise roared around her, doubt screaming louder than gunfire. She closed her eyes. Trust the hush, not the noise. Her grandfather's words echoed inside her, carried on the memory of brass and silk. She exhaled, opened her eyes, and fired. Her bullet cracked through the din, striking true. One muzzle flash silenced. The recruit steadied, whispered corrections faster now, his numbers alive with urgency. Gritted his teeth, his rifle barking, his shot ringing steel. Drake cursed under his breath but landed another hit. Was stone, her breathing unbroken, her targets folding one by one. The hillside went still. Only the hiss of engines cooling filled the air. The recruits stared at each other, shock written across their faces. They had survived barely. The convoy was theirs. But the silence that followed wasn't triumph. It was heavy, unsettled. Real bullets meant real stakes. Someone had made this more than a test. They extracted the evidence, secured what they could, and fell back under cover of night. Their breaths were ragged, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. At High Pines waited, his expression carved from stone. Talbot stood beside him, his arms folded. "You weren't meant to face live fire," said quietly, his gaze cutting to. "But you did, and you brought them back." His eyes swept the recruits, faces pale, eyes burning with the weight of what they'd endured. "You are now." The recruits straightened, pride and fear mingling in their silence. Later stood alone on the range. The battered scope lay beside her, its brass glinting faintly under the moonlight. She traced its edges, her fingers pausing over every scar, every seam. She thought of her grandfather, of the words hidden inside, "Trust the wind, trust yourself." She thought of Talbot, of his gravel voice reminding her that failure was part of the method. She thought of her recruits, their fear, their persistence, their growth. And she understood. The hush wasn't about perfect shots or impossible records. It wasn't about legacy, medals, or myth. It was about dignity in silence, about listening when the world screamed, about carrying fear without letting it own you. She raised her rifle one last time that night. The valley stretched before her, dark and endless. She breathed in, let the hush settle, and squeezed. Steel rang. Not a record, not a legend, just a reminder. That silence wasn't absence, it was control. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.